Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dylan, it's no secret that the boys are very high on LSU heading into 2025. And as Brian Kelly and LSU kick off spring practice, the fellas are hearing all the right things, specifically around the offensive line, where you look at LSU and say, a lot of boxes are checked heading into 2025. Question marks about replacing that offensive line. And look, Dill, I don't need the offensive line to be the best offensive line in the country. But if you're telling me that LSU gets solid offensive line play in the 2025 year, this is going to be as dangerous of team as any in the 2025 year. And I don't know why so many people were, panicked about the offensive line where, yeah, it's a lot of new faces. You did some nice work in the transfer portal. You've consistently done nice work on the high school recruiting trail. And Coach Brad Davis has done a phenomenal job developing talent. And you're kind of hearing that storyline play out in the early portions of spring practice. Want to get into the offensive line and what it might shake out as going into 2025 before we get into, and as always, to the LSU fans, appreciate you guys. It just feels like this team's flying under the radar. And every time we talk LSU, ton of support from y'all. Appreciate it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, let's start with what I think is probably the biggest storyline for LSU going into 2025, the offensive line. Who's standing out to you when you're reading the spring practice notes? What excites you the most about this LSU offensive line in 2025?
In one really interesting development is it sounds like DJ Chester's sort of winning that battle at center. And you look, that's where it'll get interesting because even if DJ Chester's the better center, I look Braylon Moore with his size and like his athleticism, he certainly feels like a kind of a true blue center, if you will. Like, again, he probably has a level of positional versatility, but if one of those two is kicking out to guard, I'd imagine it'd be Chester just because he has a much better athletic profile to be a guard or a center, perhaps. So that's a battle I kind of look at. It'll be interesting because, again, when you talk about getting your best five on the field, it certainly feels like it would include Braylon Moore. And if DJ Chester is really starting to emerge and be the better guy, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. But I do wonder how they'd sort of play that because, again, would Braylon Moore be an elite guard? I don't necessarily feel that would be the case exactly.
I 100% agree. Look, we know Braylon Moore can play the center position. If you're telling me DJ Chester is looking better than Braylon Moore center, you got to find a spot I'm in your starting five. I get LSU fans being frustrated with DJ Chester last year. I also think it's important to recognize that he was a redshirt freshman playing in the SEC. Like, of course, not everybody can be Will Campbell and come out as a freshman and look and kind of be that guy. DJ Chester's only going into year 3. I loved him coming out of high school. I arguably think he can be a better guard than he was center. That to me fascinates me because now I look at the interior of the offensive line. Braylon Moore, again, there's a large sample size telling us he can play at the power 4 level. DJ Chester's playing better than Braylon Moore. You feel really good about DJ Chester. And then Josh Thompson, guy that's probably best at guard, but could kick out the tackle. Dill, the other storyline for me is Tyree Adams. Sounds like he's locking it down at left tackle. A guy that, wasn't perfect against Baylor in the bowl game, but I thought looked solid. Again, another year development with Tyree Adams at left tackle. You're telling me, all right, the interior offensive line's looking good. We might have found our starting left tackle, and again, it's early, but you feel comfortable about Tyree Adams. And then you mix in a guy like Weston Davis maybe competing at right, a guy like Carius Curran, who apparently is taking LSU by storm as an early enrollee true freshman. I'm all of a sudden looking at this LSU offensive line and say, not only do I feel pretty good about the starting five, I'm starting to feel really good about the depth of this room too. I'm talking about the 6th, 7th, and 8th guy. And LSU fans know this, playing in the SEC. You want to be an SEC champ. You want to make a run in the college football playoffs. 5 good offensive linemen ain't good enough. You're starting to feel better and good about, 8, 9 guys on the offensive line for LSU.
Well, and then you even look at a guy like Josh Thompson, what they're going to do with him exactly, because you kind of hear some rumblings that they might try him out at right tackle again. Like, I look, when you have Weston Davis, Ethan Callaway, and then Carius Curran, like, you have a lot of really talented answers, especially if you don't really need to worry a ton about the left side with Tyree Adams seemingly being the guy, if you will. I do wonder because, again, you even talk, you got some really talented interior guys who we didn't really met, like
Cohen
Cohen
Eccles.
Eccles. I wouldn't be surprised if he finds a way to like be in a battle for a job because I thought, again, you talk about guys who stood out against Baylor. I thought he had a really good game. You kind of know he was a really, really, really talented guy coming out of high school.
I wasn't as concerned as most. You know, I think it's easy for like the national media to look at, oh my God, we lose so many guys to the NFL. LSU's offensive line is going to stink. It was certainly a question for me. I ain't saying like I felt great about LSU's offensive line 4 weeks ago, but I didn't feel as bad as many. And now I'm starting to buy in to this LSU offensive line being a pretty dang
And
solid
there's
unit.
teams, it's going to be a problem. And it's teams that haven't had any track record of developing high school guys or aren't really recruiting particularly well in the high school trail. LSU, I would say, dispels both those rumor or potential problems, if you will, quite nicely. Because
they've done both. They've recruited well and they've developed well. And they've supplemented through the transfer portal well. I mean, you're in a pretty good spot, I feel like. All right, moving on to the secondary, which I arguably think might be the second biggest storyline here. Coach Baker's defense, look, we saw the LSU defense take a step. What excited me the most is, all right, now we're going year 2 with Coach Baker's system with better guys in the secondary. Go back to last year, I was very vocal. We weren't deep enough. We didn't have good enough players. Like, you couldn't really run the Coach Baker defense with how bad the personnel was in the secondary. Completely turned on its head. Look, we knew Mansour Delane was that guy. I thought it was the most important transfer portal addition that LSU made. Jakeem Jackson flies under the radar because, all right, Mansour Delane was a big name. DJ Pickett's a very big name who is apparently looking very good as well in spring camp. Jakeem Jackson, former blue chip prospect that was committed to Florida. Look, there was a reason that Corey Raymond decided to bring Jakeem Jackson over to LSU. Sounds like he is a guy that can play some serious football. All of a sudden, kind of similar to how we talked about the offensive line, I'm starting to feel good about the starters in the back end. I'm starting to feel really good about the depth of LSU in the back end as well. That competitive competition, it's hard for me to not see this LSU secondary being a much improved unit from what it was in the 2024 year.
And one guy I look at now in terms of what they're going to do with him is PJ Woodland, because you really saw him first take his first nickel reps, really, if you will, in that bowl game against Baylor and played a lot of snaps there. I look at the boundary cornerback spot. I think it's really, really good. The safety spot, especially if Tamarcus Cooley can play well, I think they finally got Javian Toviano where they should have had him. Like, he is not a boundary corner, definitely not athletic enough, was getting beat pretty consistently vertically, but can be, I think, a pretty solid safety. I am wondering what they're going to do with PJ Woodland now, because I do feel like you need to get him on the field, and I think he can play a really good nickel.
At least we're in a better spot than last year, where it was like, all right, Javian Toviano, we know you're not a boundary cornerback. We know you're not that good there, but we don't have anybody else to play, so you were trotting you out there. Now, like, you kind of just summed up why I'm high on the secondary. Well, we got a really good player in PJ Woodland, or I would say the same thing with the guy like Deshaun Spears at safety. Now we're trying to figure out ways to get our players on the football field, as opposed to 12 months ago, we were forced to play players that we knew weren't that good and we knew were playing out of position and probably weren't all that ready. Now, you got question marks about the defensive line a little bit. That's where we're going next. But the secondary should be significantly better than it was last year. Number 3, who replaces a guy like Braden Swinson? LSU sneaky, really good rushing the passer. Whether it was Swinson, whether it was Savion Jones, the interior of the defensive line, you still have question marks about. As both of us, Bills Mafia guys, I trust my guy Kyle Williams to get it right. From a personnel standpoint, I have question marks. The edge rusher room, okay, we brought in some high-profile names: Patrick Payton, Jack Pyburn. You mentioned Gabriel Relaford, and you've been banging the table for Gabriel Relaford for 12 months now. What intrigues me the most is that Patrick Payton's a guy that is arguably he is one of the most talented edge rushers in the country as a pure pass rusher that is athletic, long, and twitchy. They ain't that many more gifted. Now it's like, hey, can we maximize Patrick Payton? What a better situation than have a young Gabriel Relaford, hey, nipping at Patrick Payton's heels and saying, hey, if you're not maximizing yourself in the spring and in the fall, I am going to take your snaps. I love it for Patrick Payton, and I love it for Gabriel Relaford. And once again, we're talking about that competitive depth benefiting this LSU defense going into the 2025 year.
Because you even just look at the difference with Patrick Payton from 23 to 24 at Florida State when
horrible.
he was not the guy, when you had Jared Verse and you had some really, really good defensive linemen. And then you go to 24 where he was supposed to take that role and be the guy, if you will, on defense. And you didn't see a ton of effort. It didn't feel like snap in, snap out. Yeah. Obviously, the team wasn't particularly good either, which certainly wasn't helping. But I think you're right. I look, Gabriel Relaford, to me, I think has played better football than Patrick Payton. And Patrick Payton certainly shown better flashes at his moments, at his highs. But Gabriel Relaford, down and down out right now, I'm probably trusting a hair more than Patrick Payton.
Totally disagree. But trusting, I actually don't hate, because Patrick Payton, there is some real inconsistencies. Look, it's a good problem to have because you got
Patrick Payton's highs are really, really good. I don't want to downplay that, but Gabriel Relaford, I really like the way he's coming on. I think he plays with a really good motor. I think he's physical in the run game. Again, him with another year of development, I think is going to be really good.
I don't think it's crazy to say he could be better than Patrick Payton. I mean, it might sound a little crazy, but I don't think it's that crazy because Gabriel Relaford's got some juice to him. Bill, it's kind of that interesting. You get the same feeling. You know, Savion Jones, the more physical, heavy-handed one. Okay, that's going to be Jack Pyburn, who is a beauty. I mean, I listen to him get mic'd up. He's a kind of guy. Bill, here's another kind of side note here. It feels like LSU hit on the transfer portal additions from a between the ears approach too. It's like, okay, we got really good football players. We got a bunch of guys that want to be here and want to compete too, which is that conversation that we don't always have when it comes to the transfer portal. I feel like LSU did a good job bringing in those guys who are wired right. All right, last one I want to talk about, offensive skill, which another reason to buy stock in LSU. Look, they weren't. We thought they were going to be really good. You know, from what we heard in spring and fall, and guys like Hilton and Lacey, we were excited that it could be an elite unit. Even when you lost Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors, it just never became that unit. This year, they go to the transfer portal. They have some guys coming up the pipeline. Here's what stands out to me the most, Caden Durham. Caden Durham has the chance to be one of the best running backs in the conference, one of the best running backs in the country. And when we said, hey, how do we get Garrett Nussmeier to take that year two starter jump that a lot of LSU fans are talking about? Give him a better run game. Let's run the football. Let's stick to the run game, and let's run the football more effectively. Caden Durham was great as a freshman, getting his body right going into year two. Caleb Jackson as well, a guy that lost a little bit of weight. I'm intrigued by what this running back room is going to look like in 2025 as well.
Because you do probably want Caleb Jackson to get back, and I don't think he's going to be able to take that running back one spot from Caden Durham. I just think Caden Durham showed too much. You just want better from Caleb Jackson.
And it's a good running back one, running back two dynamics. Caleb Jackson's a big body that wants to run physically, and Caden Durham's a little bit more of a burner from Duncanville High, and a guy that's running 10.5s and 100-meter dash. And then Barian Brown seems like a massive hit too. And I think everybody's sleeping on Aaron Anderson. That's that natural, I'm going to gravitate to the new faces, which I don't blame LSU fans for doing. I think Barian Brown's – I thought he was the best wide receiver in the portal. I still think he's going to have a massive year for LSU. Don't sleep on Aaron Anderson. Don't sleep on a guy like Chris Hilton. And Dill, don't sleep on tight end Bauer Sharp, who I feel like I got to remind people led Oklahoma in targets, led him in receiving yards, in an absolutely miserable offense. And Bauer Sharp, although a fifth-year senior, is only getting better at the tight end position. He started out as just an athletic wildcat quarterback. He's still getting the nuances of inline blocking and still learning how to separate and work the middle as a route tree runner. Name me the position that LSU is worse off in than they were in 2024. You can. That doesn't mean you don't have question marks. We all got question marks about that defensive line, specifically on the inside. We still got question marks on the offensive line. Outside of the offensive line, I don't know if there's a position LSU's worse off in going into 2025, and they were a damn good football team in 2024.
No, in this wideout room, I think should take a huge step. Even people used to talk about sleeping on Chris Hilton, banged up last year, didn't have a consistent year, obviously, but then in the bowl game, you saw kind of what Chris Hilton can be, taking the top off the defense, being able to separate underneath. He still is a guy who I think if you get a really good season out of him where he's playing consistently, can be a really, really good player.
If you told me Chris Hilton was a top 100 pick in 12 months, I wouldn't be stunned. And
I wouldn't be stunned. But it's in the traits, he can catch the ball.
Well,
You
catching
just
the
need
ball, we got to work on that. If we catch the ball more consistently in 2025, we're that guy with Chris Hilton. All right, we'll sign out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.